It's likely you've spent countless nights working on tracks and tweaking the mix just to wake up the next morning and be surprised at how bad it sounds. And often, the longer you spend on a mix, the worse it sounds. Until you fix this issue, you won't finish many tracks, your listeners won't like your music, and your friends won't want to talk to you. This video goes over 5 issues you'll likely have with your mix and how to fix them. The first issue is what I call mix fatigue. If you spend a whole day working on your mix, you're going to be blind or deaf to the imperfections in it. For example, you can make a good beat like this, and you wake up the next morning and it sounds completely different. Here's how to fix it. The first is have breaks in between mixing your track. Go and listen to some different music, go and do something else, go to sleep, come back and listen to your track, and you'll suddenly be able to hear what's going on again. The second thing you can do is have a reference track. For example, you can go and listen to another beat, listen to what level the layers are at, how simple or complicated the layers are, and what the arrangement is like. This isn't copying, this is just getting inspiration and learning for some top tracks, and going and being inspired by something that people already like and listen to. For example, you can go and get an instrumental like this one from Take It Back. When I listen to it, one thing I'm noticing is the 808 is hitting on a lot of really high notes, which makes it really stand out. This can clash with the vocals. You can use this insight to go and lower some of the notes of the 808 to make it a bit less prominent. Another thing I notice is the volume of the hi-hats. They're a little bit loud, so you can go and lower the volume, or something else you can do is go and open up an EQ. And just turn down the highs a little bit for the hi-hat, which is going to make it blend in a little bit nicer and sound a bit less sharp. If you're making beats for a certain artist or you're making a track in a certain genre, it can be really good to go through and have these different reference tracks. This beat here is already mixed, but if I hadn't done any mixing at all, it would have been even more helpful to go through and listen to the volume of the layers. The second massive mistake that you'd likely make are boosting certain layers versus making the rest of them more quiet. So many producers, myself included, make the massive mistake where they're mixing their track, where you really like this flute, for example, so you have the volume up pretty high, and then you want the kick and the 808 to really stand out. So you boost the kick and you boost the 808 slightly, and you're left with a track that's really loud, and it's hard to make any of the layers stand out because everything is already too loud. What I recommend doing, and this is one of the top mixing tips I recommend, is going and starting by mixing the layers a bit more quiet. For example, if you start by mixing the melody, go and start with the volume quite low. And this leaves so much room for the drums. And then you can go and add a maximizer, compressor, or soft clipper to boost the volume even further and make the track really hit hard. For example, if you listen to the mix now, the 808 sounds pretty good, and if I want it to hit even harder, there's a lot of room to go and boost the volume. And then from there, there's still room to go and boost the volume of the actual track. For example, you can go and use something like Fruity Soft Clipper and increase the post. And look at the final volume. Here it's around -6 to -3. And as you increase the post, you can get it up to -0 decibels, and the track hits really hard without distorting. So if you get stuck and a layer isn't as loud or as prominent as you like, instead of going and boosting the volume of that layer even further, try lowering the volume of everything else. Even if it takes 10 attempts or more to go and do the leveling for your track, I recommend doing it to get it right, because leveling is such a massive part of mixing. The next issue lots of producers have is having too many layers. The big issue is if you're making beats like this, or even if you're making tracks to get a vocalist on it, the track sounds a little bit empty and a little bit boring without the vocals. This is where so many producers fall into the trap of adding even more layers to try and compensate for the lack of vocals without realizing that they're not leaving any room for the vocals themselves. An issue so many producers fall into, including myself, is let's just say you make a really cool melody like this one here. You then find a really cool kind of synth or arpeggio like this, and you want to add to this melody to make it sound more full or more epic. The issue most producers do is go and copy the first melody on top of the second melody. If you go and have a look at the EQ for these melodies, you'll notice that because they're hitting on the same notes, they're almost in the exact same EQ frequency. One of the best ways to make these blend together nicely, and this is something that Nick Mira recommended in their mixing video, is by going and changing the octaves of them. I'm going to grab this arpeggio here and move it down an octave. This is going to help it blend together nicely, but it doesn't just end there. When you're adding layers, I also recommend taking out layers. You'll notice here when the beat comes in, I take out this main piano and add this really subtle bell in the background, and it sounds really cool to not have things get even more overcrowded by adding more layers, but you're just switching things around. And I think the beat sounds perfectly simple. There's so much room in the melody range to add a vocalist, so I definitely recommend not overcomplicating your tracks. Another issue you can face is having bad samples or bad melodies. Some samples may have gaps at the start, they may have harsh frequencies, there may be some 808s that are out of tune, and you may have good samples, but they're just not good for the genres and styles that you're making. For example, having like a Fat Spins 808 in a pop beat will sound pretty bad, but having a weak kind of bass in a drill or trap beat will also sound bad. So not only do you need good samples, but you also need good diverse samples. If you want samples for every genre, you can get the Producer Hit Lab with 15,000 royalty-free samples and MIDI, as well as free bonuses for 95% off by clicking the link in the description. You just drag this project into any DAW. You open up the melody library, for example, and you pick any of the genres. Let's just say you want to pick hip-hop, for example. There are perfect melodies, and if you open up the stems in the MIDI folder, you're getting all the MIDI, the stems, the chords, the live vocals, and any part of it you want to use. Even if you get your samples elsewhere, I definitely recommend having high quality diverse samples, or it's going to hold back your beat massively. The fifth big mistake is not leaving room for vocals. It's likely a lot of your tracks are designed to have vocals on them. For example, if you're making a beat for a rapper, or even if you're making like an electronic dance style track, it's likely you'll put some vocals on it, maybe even some vocal chops, but if you don't have room for them, it's going to sound really bad and it's going to really clash together. There's one really cool way of figuring out whether or not your beat has room for vocals. I downloaded the acapella for Yes Indeed by Drake. Yes Indeed is 120 BPM. I want to go and set this track to 120 BPM. Right click on the time for this acapella and then click project tempo. I'm then going to set this track back to 145 BPM.
The dash is busy, the schedule busy, my head in a hoodie, my shorty a goodie, my cousins are crazy, my cousins like boogie. Life is amazing, it is what it should be.
I think these blend together really nicely. If it didn't fit, you'd be able to tell. Another thing you can do is go and open up an EQ for this acapella, for example, and just go and have a look at.
The dash is busy, the schedule busy, my head in a hoodie, my shorty a goodie, my cousins are crazy, my cousins like boogie.
The types of EQ ranges this is hitting on, and then you can go and do the exact same thing for your beat. There's lots of room around the low mids to mids here where the acapella was hitting. I think this is perfect for sending out to an artist. I hope you learned so much from this mixing tutorial. We have another few mixing tutorials with lots of other really powerful strategies, so make sure to click one of the recommended videos to see those. If you want to learn how top producers make their beats, there should also be another recommended video, or click on my channel and go and watch one of those. If you want to get free royalty-free samples, click the link in the description or go to wavegrind.com, and if you want to get the Producer Hit Lab for 95% off, click the link in the description to get this limited time overpowered production tool.